Hi, this video is about AI coding predictions by top people at Anthropic and OpenAI, specifically the CEO of Anthropic right here with this very flattering picture of him or still of him, and then the chief product officer of OpenAI.
Fair amount of concern about this. On one hand, I think comparative advantage is a very powerful tool. If I look at coding, programming, which is one area where AI is making the most progress, what we are finding is we are not far from a world, I think we'll be there in 3 to 6 months, where AI is writing 90% of the code. And then in 12 months, we may be in a world where AI is writing essentially all of the code. The programmer still needs to specify, what are the conditions of what you're doing? What is the overall app you're trying to make?
Okay, so he's saying in 3 to 6 months, 90% of code will be written by AI, and in a year, 99% of code will be written by AI. There are quite a few problems with this, even with significant improvements in the models themselves. If you've seen some of my other vibe coding videos, I can put some links to those below as well. There are just too many scenarios where it paints itself in a corner. It doesn't matter, and we'll see, when we look at what the chief product officer says, the way that they're measuring, using metrics to try to predict the real world scenarios does not connect. They're measuring a very narrow slice of what coding is and not really understanding or putting the pieces together for what that means in the real world. Additionally, these are very self-serving predictions, especially for Anthropic and even OpenAI as well. It builds the value of their company if people believe that this statement is true. And then third, there's also an aspect here is like, what does it really mean for the AI to write the code? If it writes it, but then it's more like an autocomplete, I type a few characters and then it autocompletes the line, is that the AI writing the code? If I review it, is that and change just a little bit, is that the AI writing the code? How do you even define that? There's not really a single clear correct way to define that, so it's a very arbitrary thing that they're picking here. And when we see what the OpenAI guy says and how he measures it, I'll comment a little bit more on how they're measuring it and how they're judging this. And then fourth, the way that the reason why he's predicting this is the recent gains from reinforcement learning that they're getting with the reasoning models. They are getting massive improvements in the metrics, in specific metrics, which to me is like testing a warrior with a written test. Something, but it's, they better not get 0 on a test of critical ideas, but it doesn't show how good of a warrior they really are. That's pretty much what is happening here. But they are improving on those things. And so they're kind of also, they're making, we're getting this level of improvement, that's going to continue forever. Keep in mind that these same people at OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google predicted years ago that all they needed was the pre-training and not this reinforcement learning, the reasoning that they're using, because they kind of saw the trend and then they projected it out. But that's not how technology trends work. There are a very few amount, like Moore's law, that actually work that way, but in general that is the exception and not the rule. It's very lumpy. There's massive bursts of development with long flat times, just like in AI. There's been big bursts and then years, decades of flat progress. He also says here about how the AI, the person who, the programmer will still have to kind of tell it what to do. And I think they're underestimating, no matter how good the model is, how important this is and how much work and part of the process this still is on an iterative basis. There are so many steps that this is a very iterative process. Even if the model codes it exactly perfectly with no bugs, which is a huge if, the human is going to need to intercede and to guide it in an iterative process. You're not going to just be able to give it one long let's say one page instruction and just hit go, and it's going to be able to go on a loop and a loop and a loop and a loop and a loop, and then you're going to end up with this production level game or software that's 20,000 lines of code that all works really well. The bigger it gets, the harder it is. There's still a lot of major challenges for them to solve as the context gets bigger. It still does a lot better when the context is within a limited amount of size. Now that's probably going to grow, but there's still some challenges in there. It still hallucinates things. It hallucinates libraries. That's something they assumed that would be fixed by now, but it's really not fixed, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be fixed anytime soon. So this is a pretty crazy prediction. Let's move on to the OpenAI. So I'll put a link to this one as well. And actually, he mentions in this podcast that he was talking to somebody at Anthropic, and they give a different answer. So maybe this is the CEO. Keep in mind the CEO and the chief officers are one of their main jobs is sales, especially the CEO. So let's see what this guy has to say.
Right, a few weeks ago, and I said, does Anthropic have a timeline for when code gets like 99% automated? I'm talking about actual functional code that you write for front end and back end. They said, yeah, 2027. Right? Do you have timelines on that? Do you have a theory on where code goes? Because you write this on a daily basis, and you work with the research teams, and you build product. Do you have a timeline in mind, or at least a thesis on how this plays out?
I mean, at the rate that we're going, I would be surprised if it's 2027. I think it's going to be sooner.
And Kevin's like, if Anthropic said 2027, we're going to say 2026.
Look, so when we launched GPT-4o, like you said, very good coding model, like back end of GitHub Copilot and all these other things. People are using it at scale all over the world. But it doesn't really compare with, like, when we launched O1 Preview, it was a much better coding model because reasoning matters when you're writing code, right? Whether you're anything hard you're doing, if you're doing a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku, you're writing code, you want some level of reasoning, some ability to like break down a problem into smaller problems, form hypotheses, validate or refute those hypotheses. And like, that's what reasoning is doing. So O1 Preview was, I think, the best, like the millionth best competitive programmer in the world. When you play it against you sort of replay a bunch of programming competitions, it would come in at about 1 millionth, which, doesn't sound that great, but there are, I don't know, 30, 40 million programmers in the world. So you're like top 2-3%. O1, that was O1 Preview. O1, when it launched, our first like real launch of a coding model, was something like the 1,000th best engineer in the world at competitive coding contests. O3, which is coming soon, according to the same benchmarks, is the 175th best competitive coder in the world.
Okay, so his metric for determining whether or not AI can code for real is competitive coding competitions. This is not a good metric. It's better than nothing. It's something, it does show progress of a kind, but it is not, even if it gets to be the first, and he goes and talks about this being the first, and actually he kind of contradicts himself here in a second. We'll see if we can find it where he mentions this exact thing that I'm about to say, which is that it doesn't necessarily represent real world coding. It also doesn't take into account some of the major flaws for AI coding. Again, AI coding is very useful, don't get me wrong. I use AI to code, but it creates major issues, even the best models today. And there are certain aspects of it that it is possible that they will still be trying to solve them 5 years from now. As a collaborator, yes. But the idea that before 2027, so in his prediction, it's March of 2025, so at most 21 months, so a year and a half plus, a year and 3/4, we're going to have 99% of AI, 99% of coding completely automated, that is, to me, that does not make sense. That does not jive with, even if these models continue to improve, even if they win all the best coding, all the coding competitions are just AI models winning over and over again. That does not mean that translates to the real world. Okay, I believe that this could be true by the metric of competitive coding, that narrow slice that doesn't really represent real world building of software, that AI could be beating all the humans by the end of this year. Especially when you consider how much money and resources and tokens they throw at this thing. When you think about when they were trying to do the coding benchmarks, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to take that test essentially, because they just run it through the model and they just throw a bunch of money at it. And to me, that's not really a very fair comparison, because it's like, okay, we're going to do a coding thing, but I'm the competitive coder, but I've got 200 coders behind me that are feeding me ideas and putting stuff into me, or I have 10 years to try to answer a query. It's not really apples to apples comparison. And even with the best models today that do pretty well on some of the benchmarks, they make lots of errors. There are lots of issues. I think that a really good metaphor for this is the Tesla self-driving. I pre-purchased the full self-driving, it's like 6.5 years ago. According to Elon, that was going to be fully self-driving. I don't know. I think his first prediction was almost 10 years ago. And part of the challenge is that with every percentage point you get closer to 100%, it gets exponentially harder. And especially when it comes to driving. And driving is a more narrow use case, I think, than coding. There's so many edge cases that it becomes really, really hard to get those last few percentage points. And in fact, what you end up doing a lot of the times, you end up playing whack-a-mole with trying to solve problems. You try to solve this problem over here, and it actually, this other one that you thought you did have solved becomes worse, and now it's no longer solved because you're trying to balance a bunch of different stuff. And so I would expect that this is part of what they're going to run into, especially when you can account for hallucinations and the fact that it really has trouble the more context you give it. But let's hear more of what he has to say.
AI passed humans at chess like 15 years ago. This is the year that AI gets better than humans at programming, like forever. Right? And there's no going back.
Okay. Not the same thing. Being better at programming versus being better at programming competitions. Two very, very different things. It seems like it should be the same, but it is definitely not. In terms of actually building real-world software that people can use, that you can sell or that you can use for yourself. AI can do like some of these little projects, hit or miss. But the more complexity you add to it, it rapidly becomes incredibly challenging to the point of being impossible for AI to do. Now, there's other situations out there where people are saying, we vibe coded this amazing thing. Number one, in almost all scenarios where it actually works, there's a real coder behind it who understands what to build and kind of how to build it and how to guide it. But also for the few situations where it actually kind of makes it to production, I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that there's still key places where they didn't fully vibe code it. All right, that the human has to step in, and that there were often times when people try to do it this way that it often wastes their time, and they spend more time trying to fix the bugs than they would have if they just built it right the first time. Additionally, sometimes it can create really weird bugs. It can use Firebase, for example, which is known to have major vulnerabilities just because there's a lot of people who've used Firebase. Stuff like that. So this is a completely different statement that he's doing, but he's kind of switching the goalposts here.
And we're putting a lot of focus into this. Anthropic's putting a lot of focus into this. Google's putting a lot of focus into this. So of all the things, this is going to move really fast. And I think the world's going to be different because of it. I think a lot better. Imagine all the things that you can do if you don't need to be an engineer to create software. Like software, if you could write software, the reason that it's actually...
Okay, hold up. Again, just because the AI is doing it does not mean that you don't need to be an AI engineer. In fact, what we're beginning to understand is that the more senior you are, the more experience you actually have with the coding, the better you're able to actually get the AI to do what you want. If you just don't have any coding experience and you come in and you're like, make me a game, it's going to be incredibly hard for you to guide it in the right direction. There's so many decisions that need to be made What's your stack? How are you going to solve these different problems? Understanding how to guide it so that it goes down this path instead of that path, because that one is a dead end. That, from a statistical standpoint, it seems like a reasonable next step to the model, no matter how good the model is. But actually, there's a dead end for any number of reasons. So I think that, again, he contradicts himself later when he talks about this. So we'll continue.
Humans at software is way more important than AI passing humans at like chess. Is that with software you can create anything you want almost.
Agreed.
And so what a democratizing effect this can have on the world if everybody can create software. I was talking to some people, they were relaying, back in the COVID days, they were trying to create for their local like city, they were trying to create a website that allowed them to like track various things related to COVID data. And there were no engineers free, and they didn't have the skills themselves, and they just couldn't do it. And as a result, like they just didn't have that information. I mean, you could do that today. There's really no problem today for any of the top models, let alone when these models are able to produce sort of arbitrary amounts of great software. So I'm excited for this future. It's going to be here very soon.
Kevin, but do you really think engineers having more free time is good for the world? Because I have many engineering friends, and I don't need that competitive energy to be channeled into things that I like to do.
I mean, I don't know about you. I spend some like non-trivial fraction of my day.
Okay, they kind of go back and forth a little bit, but one last thing that he does say in this podcast is that the people who know how to code are going to be able to use the AI better. So that, to me, is again, it's kind of a contradiction of, well, anybody can build software. I find that to be a very suspect claim. Again, that is very self-serving for OpenAI to say, for people to believe that basically by 2026, AI will be able to code 99% of things. I think that's very self-serving. And how long did Elon say self-driving was 2 years away? For how long? For like a decade? And it's still not completely here. I have the car and it still does a lot of stupid stuff. It's definitely improved, but very, very slowly. It was at 98, 99% 6 years ago. I was able to do just about, most of the things. Maybe it was more like at 97% and they moved it to 97.5 or 98.5, somewhere in that range. But you think about every 20-minute drive, how many edge cases are there on a 20-minute drive? There's a decent amount. Just like with code has to be right. You have 10,000 lines of code. You have one line that is hallucinated or that is wrong. It can break the whole thing. And it sometimes can be something that is really weird. Like it looks correct, but at least upon first glance, there are things like that I've encountered with the model, or the line where it's actually failing isn't where the bug is. It's somewhere completely different, where the AI put in something that makes absolutely no sense because it did it based upon a random distribution, and then that causes the issue at a certain place. I've faced that as well, where it was like, oh my God, why is this happening? This should not be happening, because it did something really stupid in a completely different part that I found kind of accidentally. So I think that these predictions, if you're worried about coding jobs, I think that actually the best thing you can do is learn to code better. Continue to try to understand. I think it's useful to use the AI tools, so I don't think you need to not use them. But when you use them, it's important to try to understand. Building your understanding of how to code, how to build things well, how things work, is going to be useful, even if these people are correct, which I find it to be very, very suspect and very self-serving. I think most likely it's going to be more of a collaborative process, and coding is going to it has gotten better and will get better with AI, but it'll be a long time before you can just go, make me a Ninja Gaiden game, a clone, and hit go, and have it come out 20 minutes later, 20 hours later, whatever, with a fully working game that is exactly as you would want it, and where it doesn't have any bugs. I find that to be very, very far away. And again, I think that even much simpler situations, they struggle with. finding and debugging their own issues. So let me know what you think. I'll put links to these videos below, along with the timestamp, so you can jump right to the parts where I showed in this video. Curious to hear what you have to say. Please like and subscribe. Have a great day. Bye.